Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Furiously Curious Show. I appreciate you being here. A couple things, notes here before we get started. First, the sponsor of this video is my coaching company, Furiously Curious Coaching. I help overworked business owners be successful in their business, but do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice on faith, family, and free time. So that's very much my story as well. As a coach, I don't have the answers. I have the questions. I always say consultants have all the answers. Coaches have all the questions. I'm very good at what I do. I have a lot of testimonials to back that up. So if you're interested in that, if you're a business owner and you're in find yourself with certain things you keep running into, certain struggles, if it's work-life balance, if it's things inside your business or something else, I really believe I can help you. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me on my website, furiouslycurious.co, and the contact form there, or you can email me at kyle@furiouslycurious.co. Second note is that this is probably the most insane conversation I have ever had in my life, what you're about to listen to, today's podcast. That's recorded and non-recorded. When we were done recording, I started crying. It was just such a heavy conversation, but also filled with so much hope. And so I'm sharing that with you up front here, just to say, if your discretion advised, if you have kids listening and stuff like that, there's probably certain parts they shouldn't listen to here, but also that you're going to be tempted to turn it off halfway through because it's just too heavy with what you're hearing. And I want to encourage you not to do that because the end especially is filled with so much hope, and Brian has so many good things to share. So push through those moments, just a crazy conversation, but I think one that you'll be really blessed by and enjoy. So here is my conversation with Brian McConaghy. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Furiously Curious Show. Thanks for being here. I am here with Brian McConaghy from Ratanak International. Got put in touch with him through some friends of mine and said you'd be a great guy to chat with and you have a good organization. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
I think we'll just start from the beginning. Maybe just a brief update on your life story and kind of how up to Ratanak, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I'm involved in missions in Asia, and I never expected to be. I never actually wanted to be. My background, just a thumbnail sketch way back, I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I was a dyslexic kid, so I was the kid at 10 years old that couldn't read at all. I was bullied. I was not the victorious, striding forward into life kind of kid at all. I was the opposite. I was the one kicked around. And also in Northern Ireland, dealing with a lot of violence. I mean, it was a very violent place to grow up.
What year was this?
Well, I was born in 1963. The violence, what they call the Troubles, was 1969 to when we left, which was 1978. So I was 15 when we left. And so my high school career in Belfast was challenging academically for me, but also on a societal level, there's lots of violence. And so it wasn't pleasant. My dad was a pastor. And so he got called to a church in Canada. We didn't necessarily want to move because even though it was violent and there were disadvantages there, it's normal life. You don't know any different. Mm-hmm. So we were happy there, so to speak. And then we arrive in Canada to discover there's no armored personnel carriers on the roads. There's nobody searching you in the malls. There's no bombs going off. Like, it's really peculiar and wonderful. But I still had weapons in my bones. I grew up in an environment where soldiers kept me safe and police officers with machine guns kept me safe. So for me, firearms were a very positive thing. They were a symbol of protection and stability. I was safe around those guys. So that was a very positive mindset I had towards them.
Did the citizens have guns at that time, or was it just the government?
No, not at all. Because of the terrorism, the firearms restrictions were very, very tight. Okay. Basically, the people who had guns were the police, the armed forces, and the terrorists, and they would go at it, and everybody else keep their heads down.
Okay.
So I arrive in Canada, and I'll skip a whole bunch of non-relevant steps here, but I ended up as a weapons specialist in the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Okay. And that I took to like a duck to water. Like I'm good at that. I hadn't been good at very much in life, but that I'm good at. I was a trained sniper as well, and quite accomplished in terms of shooting internationally, medaling, etc.
In what competitions?
They were armed forces, armed forces and police competitions, competing against the Brits, Americans, Australians, Commonwealth forces.
Is you know the name of the competition?
It was National Rifle Association, and I forget what it's called. We just called them the Nationals.
It's not like Bisley or something? Or?
It was the equivalent of Bisley, but in Canada, where the Nationals were shot at Connaught Range outside Ottawa every year, and I competed in those. And the guys to beat were always the Brits. They were good. They were very good snipers. Yeah. And I had the privilege and I guess the skill of on several occasions beating them and getting gold over top of SAS guys, etc., which was a thrill for me.
Yeah.
So I knew how to use them, but I also had a really good mind for the technical aspects of firearms. I could remember stuff when I was doing forensic work, and I have got a bullet under a microscope, all the striations and the damage to a bullet caused by the barrel of the gun. For some reason, my brain remembers that, the patterns. And so there were several occasions where I'd be looking at a bullet and I'd say to one of our techs, go grab that bullet. Remember that homicide in Burnaby 8 months ago in that parking lot? Go grab that bullet and put it under the microscope and compare it, same gun. Like my brain just, it retains that stuff.
Yeah.
So while I wasn't skilled academically in many ways, this was the job for me and I was good at it. My visual recognition.
How'd you get into it?
Sorry?
How'd you get into it?
How did I get into it? Well, the RCMP came after me. I never applied. I had, I'll backtrack then to one step where I loved old military history, and so I wasn't very good at school, but I decided to try and do a 3-year diploma in museum technology at Algonquin College in Ottawa. Did that. It was hard, but I did it, and part of that was an internship with the National War Museum. And so they put me in the National War Museum, and in a matter of about 8 months, I had memorized about 9,000 different types of weapons in that collection. Massive value to that collection nationally. And I memorized it, like I just knew it. I didn't realize, but people can't do that. I can. So I could pick up an AK-47 and tell that, well, that's a Romanian one because the reversed rivets on the front of the receiver, the position change. I retain it.
Yeah.
And so I had that, and I had been trained as a sniper and was competing as a sniper. Long story as to how that happened with the armed forces. I wasn't in the armed forces, but could do it, and they allowed me to do that. And then the RCMP found out about this guy who was an accomplished sniper, but also who knew thousands of different types of guns and how they worked and their history and how they're developed. And so they came after me and said, we've heard about you. Can you come in and visit with us? And they sat me in front of 4 senior scientists and peppered me with questions and were a little stunned at what I knew. They'd never met a civilian that knew this much. And they said, we want you, what's your degree in? And I said, I don't have a degree. And they said, we'll hold the job for 3 years, go get a degree. And I said, what degree do you want? And they said, well, normally physics would be good. With your history, we don't care. And I said, I'm not very good academically. So I went and did a degree in history. And they hired me, and my career just
Why'd
took
you pick
off
history?
Just because I love it. I love history. I studied Irish history, which I had lived through, so the tail end of that. But interestingly, God knows the future. He knows what we're going to need. I studied a lot of Southeast Asia. Politics, history, etc., that would become vital for me later, working in Cambodia. Didn't know why I was doing that. It was just interesting. Vietnam War, all that kind of stuff, turned out to be hugely valuable. So that and some law, which again, I didn't know I was headed for the RCMP, but the courses in law were really good principles for me to learn. So I ended up leaving university with everything I needed. That was God's planning, not mine. So the RCMP took me on, posted me to Vancouver, and I was involved in the busiest and, in my opinion, the best firearms team in the country for 23 years. And after only a few years of that, basically finished training, I was dealing with a lot of autopsies, a lot of dead people. My family was in Ontario, my mom and dad, my sister. I was posted out here by myself, and I was lonely. I was out here by myself. Vancouver is not an easy city to settle in. It kind of holds everybody at arm's length. It's hard to plug into. So it's I wouldn't say a cold city, but a difficult city to integrate into.
Any idea why?
I think everybody's very self-obsessed.
More so than other cities.
I don't have that much experience with too many other cities, but I would say yes, more than others. It's the visuals of Vancouver, the splendor of Vancouver. It's a gorgeous city. It can be quite superficial in terms of how people want to be perceived, and so sometimes there's a lack of depth there. Anyway, that's how I found it. I don't want to sweep everybody under the brush there, under the carpet there, but so I'm working.
Are you a Christian already at this point?
Oh yeah. I'm a Christian, but again, I grew up. I was a Christian as a child, but I'm one of those kids that, I kind of tagged along. It wasn't that meaningful for me. But when you're out by yourself and dealing with dead people every day, all of a sudden it better be real. And I very clearly remember thinking that okay, this is not the faith of my parents anymore that I'm riding on their coattails. This has to be real for me because this is ugly. And if I'm going to survive this, I need to be grounded. So what does faith mean to me? So it came to alive for me at this period.
When you have the background you did, not really pursuing the RCMP career and the work you were doing, to get to a spot where you're dealing with dead bodies, like how did you remember your first person, a case you came across and just dealing with that? Like, did you know this is what you were getting into?
Yeah. And I had a very tough staff sergeant training me. I thought he hated me for the first 2 years of my training. I didn't realize he was just pushing me hard because he saw something in me that knew I had talent in this. And so he pushed me harder, I think, than most. And it was the best thing ever happened to me. But it was hard. It was very hard. There's all kinds of details there's no need to get into, but it was very difficult work, very gory work at times.
Because you would have to go to the crime scenes and
autopsies and all that kind of stuff, and very up close and personal, dealing with the aftermath of what humans do to each other. So I was dealing with that regularly and dealing with way more autopsies and death than would normally be the case of people being trained. He threw a lot at me, and I think because he saw something in me in terms of skill and also God knew what he needed in the future in terms of resilience. And you learn resilience the hard way. Resiliency is never learnt the easy way. It's by definition, it's learnt through things that are hard. So in dealing with autopsies, I get up every morning and my family's in Ontario and I'm by myself, and Vancouver's particularly gray and wet and dark and it's in the winter, and it's depressing. I figure I've got to get out of here. I have got to go somewhere that's bright, sunny, and full of live people. I need a break. So I booked a holiday to Asia, and
this is before the 23 years of quitting, right? This is somewhere in between.
Yeah, this is I'm only in the RCMP about 4 years at this point.
Okay.
But I'm done with dead people. I need a break.
Okay,
so I book a vacation. But being a wimp, I don't want to challenge myself too much. I want it to be easy. So I book Hong Kong, dead easy. Everybody speaks English. And it was easy. And then the next portion of the trip was over to Bangkok and into Thailand. And
by yourself?
It was a brutal place. Bangkok's an interesting.
You went to the trip by yourself, though?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, just by myself.
Yeah.
And arrived stuck in a traffic jam at about 1 a.m. trying to get to the little guest house I had booked. It's a crazy place, but fascinating.
So you call yourself a wimp for just picking Hong Kong, stuff like that, but you're also the same guy living by yourself, dealing with dead people all day, and going on trips by yourself. So
but I'm by nature timid.
Okay.
But I have this ability to get out of my own skin and kind of go, okay, suck it up, Brian, deal with it.
Yeah.
And I remember actually flying in on that first trip, not so much Hong Kong, but Thailand, going to Bangkok.
Did the loneliness you experienced as a kid make it easier as an adult?
I wouldn't say loneliness per se. The adversities of life, being a kid that was the only one that couldn't read and was beaten up and didn't have many friends and all that kind of stuff. Those are difficult things, but they are useful later. They do build resiliency. So all of those things that so often I think we view as negatives, nearly always God is saying, "Oh, that is precisely what I can use later. Don't knock the hard stuff." It's nobody's denying it's excruciating when you're in it, but my goodness, there's payback later when God says that I will use. You have the strength to deal with that. So I think there was a fair bit of resiliency built into me through adversarial circumstances in school, even academic inability, etc. Poor self-esteem, all that kind of stuff. But just deal with it. So so I'm flying into Bangkok, and I was worried because I wasn't sure I knew really where I was going. And I remember saying, okay, worst case scenario. What's worst case scenario? I'm gonna have to sleep on the ground in some stinking alley with the rats if I can't find where I'm going to stay. Yeah. Can you deal with that? Yeah, I'll survive that. Okay, so get on with life. Now, it turned out I found the guest house, no problem. But so often in my life, I do deliberately catastrophize and kind of go, what is the worst case scenario here?
Still
the worst case scenario is X. Can I survive that? Yeah. And in later years, doing much more dangerous work, the worst case scenario here, I could get killed. Am I okay with that? Yes. Carry on. And so
because defining your greatest fear allows you to overcome it way more than if it's obscure and you don't actually define it.
Yeah. I often think of it in terms of horror movies. Horror movies, the most frightening thing is the monster you don't see. It's nearly always anticlimactic when they finally show you the monster.
Yeah.
Because your imagination's way more powerful than what movie producers can do. I think it's the same thing in life. If we allow our fears to control us without kind of identifying, what am I actually scared of here? It's way worse. Instead of saying, okay, what is the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
What is the worst thing that can happen here? Is God in that? Can God handle that? Yeah. If God can handle that, can I handle that? Yeah. Carry on. Deal with it. So that very much set the tone. That first trip, I ended up more or less by accident. It's a long story, but more or less by accident up on the Thai-Cambodian border in a refugee camp run by the Khmer Rouge.
When you were going to Cambodia, what was your, the point? You were just going to be a tourist? You were just going to look around? Were you going to look for mission organizations?
But I wasn't in Cambodia. I was up on the border, but I was still inside Thailand.
Okay, but in the Thailand trip, was that justification? Like you were going to go, okay, yeah.
It's live people and have some fun.
Okay.
And just enjoy the heat and be a tourist. But I end up in this refugee camp, and I arrive in this little town called Ratac on the border. And I'm due to meet friends of friends who were working with Christian Mission Alliance on a medical team. And I thought it'd be great to visit them, so did. And I arrive, and the shells are whistling right over and exploding on the other side of me. So we were in it, and I didn't know what I was into, but it was pretty dramatic. And they arrived, they met me at the bus I got off, and just said, no offense, we got to get you out of here. Like the Vietnamese troops that had occupied Cambodia just on the other side of the border. We figured they're going to roll across the border like any minute. So we got to get you out of here. This is no place for tourists right now. So I jumped in their pickup truck, and they were going to drive me somewhere, and the shells are whistling over. And as we drove, the guy who was driving said to me, I'm sorry, but we got to get you out of here. And I said, just, don't panic, because I'm not. I'm a weapons specialist. I grew up around bombs and explosions. I'm totally cool with this environment. Another skill set I didn't realize would be useful to the Lord, born out of adversity. But I'm totally comfortable in war zones, it turns out. And I remember he pulled over, and we had with the windows rolled down in the truck so we could hear where we could hear the shells going. And he pulled over to the side of the road, and he looked at me and said, so you're not freaked out by this? And I said, not at all. He said, well, do you want to stay? He said, I could use you. And I said, I got no medical skills. You're running a medical team with refugees. But he said, no, I just need people to help load the trucks. And our team's really stressed right now because of the fighting. And so we normally have devotions every morning, and we're just all too stressed. Would you mind leading? He didn't even know me. Would you mind leading devotions and sort of applying yourself to that, unloading trucks? I said, that I can do. So we stayed. And that ended up with me getting inside a refugee camp called Site 8 that was run by the Khmer Rouge. I didn't know who the Khmer Rouge were. I was quickly to learn they were the world's most brutal communists that ran the world's most efficient genocide. out of a population of 7.5 million people. They managed to kill off 3.2 million of them with basically a civil war, genocide followed by civil war. That horrible sandwich devastated that country. The psychological implications for that were huge. The refugee camp was on the border of Thailand. Basically, three sides were Thailand, and then the other side was the open border to Cambodia. And these people would straggle over the mountains through the minefields looking for medicine and food, and they were skeletal and starving. And that was my first opportunity to go to the bottom of the mountain at the edge of the minefields. And
was it there's an ethnic difference, or like why were they being killed off?
No, it's a very interesting genocide. It was a political genocide. It was a genocide. Basically, think Cultural Revolution China on steroids, where we're going to kill anybody who's a landowner, anybody who's educated, anybody who's been tainted by the West and by capitalism. It's a radical communist revolution. And their way of purifying the nation from French colonialism and capitalism was to designate that anybody who had been tainted by that history would be executed. And the line and the bar they basically put on it was, if you had more than a grade 3 education, you were selected for execution. And that's exactly what they went about doing. So if you had glasses indicating you could read, they'd execute you. If your hands were soft and you weren't a peasant worker, they'd kill you, and on and on. The doctors, the lawyers, the electricians, the teachers, everybody educated was executed, like right across the board. It's phenomenal what they did. Unique in modern history to devastate a country that way. All the cities, Phnom Penh, the capital city, April 1975. 17th of April 1975, when the Civil War ended, the Khmer Rouge won the Civil War. They rolled into the capital city. It had a population of 2.5 million people at the time. 72 hours later, it was functionally empty. They evacuated everybody. Thousands died just in that process, and they sent the entire population out to what they called the killing fields. People like you and me that are comfortable with our air conditioners and our TVs and our modern lifestyle suddenly found themselves in fields saying, well, scrape whatever food you can out of the soil. And if you indicate there's any contact with a foreign language, a foreigner, education, whatever, we'll execute you. So you got to pretend to be a peasant. Furthermore, if you're wearing colors, we will execute you, because that's very bourgeois, very Western. We want everybody wearing black and gray clothing. Well, I'm standing here in my floral blouse or my striped shirt. What am I going to do? They're going to kill me. Well, go into the bush, find berries, boil the berries, try and boil your clothes and darken down. Like, it's insane that this happens right across society. I knew nothing of this.
And this has already, when you were there, it had already happened, or was in the middle of happening?
Yeah, it already happened, and we were into the post-genocide Civil War.
Okay.
Because Vietnam had invaded to actually save Cambodia from itself. Even though they were viewed as a international pariah, Vietnam had won the Vietnam War. They had beaten the Americans. There's no doubt they had beaten the Americans, and it was the fourth largest army in the world at that time. And they watched across the border what the even more radical communists in Cambodia were doing to their own people. They put up with it for 3 years, 8 months, and then said, enough. And they invaded to save the Cambodian population from itself, and were condemned by the world for it, because they were the communists invading. They were the moderate communists invading to save people from radical communists. It was absolutely the right thing to do, morally and ethically. And the response of the international community was to seal Cambodia and Vietnam, and embargo both countries, because Vietnam had invaded. And to punish them, they sealed both countries. No food, no medicine was allowed in. Nothing was allowed in for 13 years. And so this genocide, surviving, skeletal, destroyed, pathetic, traumatized society for 13 years were denied UN aid, Red Cross aid, on and on it goes. Nothing was allowed in. It was bizarre. And that's what I ended up on the border looking at. And we have Cambodians.
What year of the 13 years?
That's 1989. October 89. And so the Vietnamese have come right through Cambodia. They're right on the Thai border. and the Khmer Rouge have retreated out of Cambodia because they can't fight the Vietnamese. They're just way too powerful. So they've retreated into Thailand and are using Thailand as bases to run a proxy war and a guerrilla war back into Cambodia. And the Vietnamese were fed up and they were ready to invade Thailand. So that's what I ended up in the middle of. And I'm watching these civilians straggle out through the minefields, and I had the privilege, it really is a privilege, to see this lady, and she would have been anywhere from 20 to 50. When they're that emaciated, you can't tell what age they are, just skin stretched over bone. And she staggered out from the minefield and was told that you're in Thailand, you're safe. At which point she fell over, and I picked her up and carried her to a little van we had, and we were bringing them back to a little bamboo hospital. I'd never picked up a human like that before. The way I describe it, it's like picking up a garbage bag full of broken china. There's no flesh there. It's just bone. It's sore to hold them because there's like a pelvis is a jagged thing, and she was really uncomfortable, light but uncomfortable, and there's just nothing there. And she had vomit in her hair, and she had excrement on her sarong. Like, she was in terrible shape. She stank. Dear knows what bugs were bouncing off her. And I'm kind of holding this scrap of humanity. Welcome to your vacation, Brian, that you planned to get away from trauma. I'm in the middle of a war zone holding this destroyed human being that is still breathing. And that was life-changing for me. I thought I'd seen trauma before. Nothing prepared me for the trauma of the killing fields of Cambodia and post-killing fields. And so I went home kind of shattered.
When you say it changed, that was life-changing, it just the shock of it and how the trajectory of your life, how it changed after that? Or
yeah, I didn't intend for it to change my life.
Okay.
But I went home brooding on
how long were you there for?
What I had witnessed. 6 weeks.
6 weeks, wow. Did you stay longer than you were originally planned? Or
No,
okay.
No, that was the plan. That was the plan. So I stayed 6 weeks, came home.
And how long were you in the refugee camp for that area?
Probably a week and a half.
Okay.
Like, not long, but enough to see enough.
Yeah.
And enough to see Cambodians too scared to talk to me because that camp was run by the Khmer Rouge and I was Western. So if they'd been seen talking to me, they were fearful they could be executed for it. It was a really bizarre environment to be in. So I came home, and I knew that no medicine was allowed in to the country. Didn't really know why. And the week I come home, as God would plan it, there's a documentary on TV, and it's called Cambodia Year 10, and it's by a guy called John Pilger. Very famous, very left-wing, very powerful journalist. And he basically goes through what's happening in Cambodia, and he blames the West. It's the United Nations that have sealed the borders. And I'm young. I'm in the RCMP. I'm fairly naive to world politics, etc. So we're the good guys, I thought. And I look at this, and I'm in disbelief. There's no way we can be the bad guys. There's no way we can be punishing this country because the bad guys are the communists. It's not going to be us. So I'm infuriated. Now, he films in his documentary, he films a little girl a few minutes before she dies. She's not even 1 yet, I don't think. I think she was 11 months old. And she's fighting for her life. And she dies because there's no medicine available for her. She's just across the border from where I was. She's inside Cambodia. He had managed to get inside this forbidden country, Cambodia, and film. And little Ratanak is kind of gasping for her life, and there's something about her. Something charismatic about that kid that just like, wow, she
When you say young Ratanak, that was the girl's name?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. Okay, that's where the name of
That's where the organization name came from. And she died a couple of minutes after that, after he filmed. So I watched this. I never met her. I just saw her on TV. But I'm infuriated because he's blaming the West. He's blaming us for this mayhem. And so being naive, but never being afraid of walking through doors that might be in front of me. Well, no, I'm afraid, but I do it anyway. I watched to the end of the documentary. I didn't know who this guy was, but the credits come up, and his name's John Pilger, and he sounded like an English guy. So it was like 10, 11 o'clock at night or whatever else. I waited a bit and then called first thing in the morning in London, called directory assistance. I want to talk to John Pilger. Like, how stupid is this? And the operators were kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, how many J. Pilgers do you want? And I said, oh, okay, well, how many have you got? And they said, forget the number they told me. And I said, okay, we're going to have to narrow it down. Just give me London. And they said something like, we got 38. Okay, give me central London. Like, I'm totally winging it. Turns out, actually, his accent was Australian. He wasn't even Brit. But it turns out he lived in London. So anyway, I asked for central London. They said, we got 9. I said, okay, give me the first one. We're going to go down the list.
Yeah.
So they put me through to the first name, and the phone's picked up at the other end, and it's this familiar voice. I said, are you John Pilger that makes the documentaries? Yes. God has a sense of humor, even with my stupidity. So I said, I've just finished watching Cambodia Year 10, and I'm totally offended by this. There is just not a chance. I'm a member of the RCMP, my stupid little 23-year-old lecture. And he was very gracious to me. He shouldn't have been. He should have just hung up. But he was gracious, and he said, well, okay, I hear what you're saying, but have you been inside Cambodia? And I said, no, I've been on the border. He says, well, we're not having this conversation then. He said, you get yourself inside Cambodia. You ask the same questions I was asking in the documentary. You poke around. If you can do that, then you come back. Then keep my number. Call me. Then we will talk. So the gauntlet was cast. It was like, okay. So I figured I'm in. It took me another 5 months, but I got in through Laos. And everything.
So you were like working those 5 months with RCMP again, and you're just doing this on the side?
I took more holiday time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to a country that is what they call a scheduled country. It's an enemy state. So it was not a good political move for my career, but I didn't care. I walked around that country. I asked the questions. I saw what was happening.
How'd you get in? How'd you get in?
It's a long story. I used a missionary office, CMA missionaries in Bangkok, who got me visas into Laos. And then Laos had one of the few Cambodian embassies that existed. And then in Laos, I negotiated with them sort of on the spot and was given visas to get in. Very unusual. The people I know who went into Cambodia at that stage, all of them have the same kind of story of God just doing dramatic things to get them in, because there really was no legitimate way of getting in. So it just worked. I ended up with a visa, flew in. Bizarre story, arriving in that place. They took your passport. There's no embassies. You're on your own. The Canadian embassy in Bangkok said, if you go in there, you're on your own. We're not coming in after you. You're done. I did it anyway. So asked a whole bunch of questions when I was there, met with government officials, met with regular people.
And this is the government. What kind of government is it at this time?
It's a communist government. It's a puppet government of the Vietnamese.
Okay. It's not the Rouge anymore.
No, not the Khmer Rouge. They were operating in the jungles of guerrilla warfare. I was on the other side of that civil war.
So there's some peace in this country now when you arrived?
Oh, no. There was shelling right in close to this capital city.
Okay.
Because the guerrilla war was still on.
And the people that you're meeting are all the highest below third grade level then?
Yeah, there were survivors. They were people that had escaped to Vietnam during the killing fields and had been trained, indoctrinated by the Vietnamese, and had come back to their own country to liberate it under Vietnamese authority. So they were all communists.
Okay.
Some of them educated, some of them not. But anyway, I asked the hard questions and discovered that everything John Pilger said in his documentary was right and actually understated. It was worse. We were so complicit in supporting the Khmer Rouge. And at that stage, the Western governments were supporting the world's most radical communists because they were great at killing Vietnamese, the moderate communists.
Yeah.
And American foreign policy they were fighting the war by proxy. They would partner up with anybody who would kill Vietnamese. And so they partnered up with the Khmer Rouge. And the international community, right down to the New Zealanders, who probably have the most independent foreign policy in the world, joined with this too. Everybody was in support of this policy of isolating Cambodia and supporting de facto the Khmer Rouge. I'm offended completely and stunned that my government would participate in this. So I figured in my naivety...
How much of these governments do you think were aware of what was going on?
Oh, very.
Okay.
Oh, very. But it's geopolitics. Geopolitics is a big, very morally bankrupt game. It's a game of chess. They do what they want, so they win, and morals have very little to do with it, even the Western government. So I my innocence was blown right out the window. I became a much more wise individual, much more savvy Christian, I think, in terms of human nature and how governments work. Clearly, there are good governments in the world and there are bad governments, but they're all self-serving, all of them.
Yeah.
So I decide there's no medicine allowed in that country. I'm going to smuggle a couple of suitcases of medicine into that country in memory of little Ratanak, who didn't survive. So that was my plan. I talked to some doctors and hospitals, and they were dead keen to do this. I could get nearly expired medication. And if you get the right meds for a tropical environment, and doctors would advise me on that, if I got the right meds, you can save a couple hundred lives just with a couple of suitcases quite easily. So I figured, okay, that's my plan. I had met government officials in Cambodia, and they said, if you want to come back, here's the number to call. We'll get you a visa out through Bangkok. So I now had my ticket in, which was really rare. So my plan was to accumulate a couple of bags of medication. I end up sitting in Vancouver with 9 tons of medication. So God's plan was a little different from mine. And he didn't consult with me on this at all. Like, I'm just sitting in Vancouver now with 9 tons of meds.
You just put the word out that you need help?
Yeah,
or?
Hospitals, and they jumped. And so I need to figure out, how do I buy a container? How do I transport a container even within Canada to a port? How do I get it on a ship? How do I ship a container internationally? How do I smuggle it through a UN embargo as international contraband as a member of the RCMP? Like, this is not a good scenario.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I'm so committed to these people. I'm so passionate about the suffering I have seen that if it costs me my job, it costs me my job. And I think so often we have these watershed experiences in life where you reach a point where Jesus says, is it me or is it everything else? And you have to make a decision. Okay, do I value other things or do I value what he's telling me? And it was very clear, everything's on the table. Jesus demands that I care for these people. Nobody else seems to be. So I'm in, irrespective of the cost. So we learned how to smuggle. I learned how to smuggle. We got it in. We distributed it. I'm trying to keep a low profile because it's an illegal shipment. But because it's such a big deal, they stuck me on state-run TV with the Deputy Minister of Health. Not a good way to keep a low profile. So here I am on the national TV of a communist enemy state as a member of the RCMP. Anyway,
you're 25, you're 25 at this time, or 25?
Yeah, I would be 25, I think, at that time. So we negotiated the container in. We distributed it appropriately. Thousands of people were saved by that. And I was then regarded with considerable favor from the Cambodian government. Came home. Canadian government weren't so happy with me, but again, it's not worth getting into the details. But through some bureaucratic stuff, I ended up preserving my career, and it was fine. So for the next 18 years, I would spend every minute of my time, evenings, weekends, leave time, either in Cambodia or working, collecting medicine, collecting money, whatever else in the Christian community. And so we started raising money for clinics. All the doctors and nurses had been killed, all the hospitals and clinics destroyed. So we would raise money to build clinics, and Christian Mission Alliance at that stage, at the tail end of the Civil War, there was a peace process through the Paris Peace Accords being negotiated, and missionaries, if not spiritual missionaries, but Christian medical missionaries were allowed in to do medical work, that kind of thing. So CMA would supply the staff, and I would supply the buildings, the ambulances, the hospitals, whatever. I would build that. So I was raising money. And it was an interesting period of time for me because I had to come to terms with honesty in the charity world. The charity world, any of you who receive newsletters and fundraising letters know it's all sweetness and light. Look at the wonderful things that are happening. And it wasn't. It was ugly. And I had to figure out, people were donating money to me, and I had to be honest with them. We built 10 rural clinics serving hundreds of thousands of people. And there was one occasion when I think 7 of them were blown up and utterly destroyed by the Khmer Rouge within weeks of finishing them. And so do I just not talk about that? Or do I go back to donors and say, remember that $500 you gave towards that clinic? Well, it's gone. And I figured, well, I got to be honest. And so with some degree of shame and trepidation, I would go back to all these people who had donated money and say it was basically wasted. It's gone. And really good lesson for me, because the response universally from these donors was not, well, we're done with you. What a waste of money. It was the opposite. It was like, I gave you $500 and they blew it up. You're kidding me. Here's $1,000. You go rebuild. And it was my first encounter with the fact that if we're honest with people, Christians in particular are not scared of a good fight, even one that they lose. If they know the rules of the game, they know the risks, and they take the risks for the Lord, if you're honest and upfront. And so we lost money on those clinics. They were destroyed, but people were more committed. They were committed to Cambodia. Now we're in a fight. And that's what I want to see more of in the Christian community, in our own Christian lives, that we shouldn't be afraid of a good fight. Even if we get bloodied by it, that's what the Lord calls us to. I've often said to people, and it's still, there's lots of hassles now. I mean, stressful, really stressful what we do in Cambodia. But I didn't sign up for easy.
When you say a good fight, like that's a good fight according to what the Bible teaches, because there's a lot of Christians that fight over really dumb things.
Ridiculous things. No, fighting for the oppressed, fighting for those that are downtrodden, taking risks in your life where, you might end up dead because of this. So what? The expression I always use, if I wanted easy, I would have signed up for beach ministry in California. I didn't sign up for that. I don't think there's too much easy in the New Testament. The bar's pretty high. He calls us to roll up our sleeves, get stuck into work, recognizing that this is going to be hard. And if the ministry you're involved in is hard and excruciating and stressful and difficult and all those things, not guaranteed, but chances are you're on the right track. It should never dissuade us from that. And I think the Lord honors us when we say, no, I'm up for this. I'm going to go down with the ship if necessary, but I'm gonna pick that unwinnable fight for the Lord. Yeah. Now, as you say, it's key that these are the fights that Jesus wants to fight, not the peculiar fights we get into that have nothing to do with the Bible or principles or actually leading people to the Lord or helping people. Clearly, in my mind, helping people that were dying and isolated, that was never an issue in my mind. This is what the Lord wanted me to do.
And I mean, most people listening to this are Western, live comfortable lives. What would you say to them?
Well, I was one of those.
But when you say fight, does that mean they should? I'm assuming it doesn't mean they should leave their jobs, and maybe some should. But what does that look like in the Western world, in the where we live?
It looks like being principled and taking on those conversations, not just loving the neighbor on the left that you really like. It's loving the neighbor on the right who drives you nuts and serving them. It's being gracious, helpful, genuinely, radically loving towards your boss who can't stand you and you can't stand him or her. It's those things. Now, God may take you overseas with the same principle, but bottom line, it's about saying, who am I to be Christ in this environment, be it office, be it school, be it whatever. Is that going to be costly? Yes. And one of the things I have learned, I actually don't evangelize anymore. I used to
when you
try
say
that.
I don't evangelize anymore, define evangelize.
Well, I'll describe it for you.
Okay.
I used to be the typical model where you take somebody out to Denny's, you're concerned about them spiritually, and you sit them down. It's very uncomfortable. It's very artificial. And say, I really need to talk to you about. Have you ever thought about Jesus in your life? I was just like, forget this. Number one, I'm terrible at it. God gives people a gift to do that. Clearly, I've seen it where they're so skilled. Great, run with it. I'm not one of those. Most people aren't. But I kept on trying to force myself into that mold, and it didn't work for me. What I have learned, though, is I still have a responsibility to evangelize. I still have a responsibility to exhibit Christ before them. But the way I've found from Cambodians and others is the way that's easy to do it is to love people so radically that they ask. So I want to be the kind of neighbor that my neighbors can call me up at 3 a.m. and say, I've got a burst pipe, and I'll drag myself out of bed, and I'm over there with my tools.
And this is the neighbor you don't like.
The neighbor you don't like.
Yeah.
And you're there at 3 a.m, and they're sitting there kind of going, what the heck is he doing? Why is he doing that? I want to be the person who says, no, I'll pay for that. No, really, I'll pay for that. Well, why? Because you're valuable, and I just think you'd get a kick out of that. And we love people around us radically so that they ask. It's interesting, and when I think of the model of evangelism where we kind of have these uncomfortable orchestrated conversations, I don't think that's generally what the New Testament model is. The New Testament model, for me, is always be prepared to give an answer. That's what we're told. Always be prepared to give an answer for your faith. Well, the way that's worded, it presumes a question. Are we living in such a way as it generates questions?
Yeah, I can 100% attest to it. I mean, I have some harder years behind me, and I was definitely living in a way that was not good for a long time. And a lot of the religious people would reach out to me, and it was condemnation. and there was others that reached out to me, and they said, "Hey, you want to grab a beer?"
Yeah.
And, when I was living and doing things that shouldn't, weren't okay, and they actually cared about me, and they built trust. Or I noticed they were reading their Bible all the time, and I'd be like, something's off here, and that they made the biggest impact by far.
Yeah. I think we can major on condemnation very easily if we feel we're right. And again, I don't see that at all. Two of my favorite passages, for a variety of reasons, given the work we do in Cambodia, but two of my favorite passages are John 4 and John 8. John 4, the Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. It's very interesting because he never, ever identifies her lifestyle as being sin. She is an abused woman. And if you actually read the text and get into the text, I always grew up thinking, she's a loose woman. She's had, 5 husbands, and the guy she's with now is not her husband. And it's kind of like, he's basically getting the dagger in and saying, you need to smarten up, He actually doesn't say that at all. He listens to her, and I've now done some study on Jewish marriage law to realize that at that time she had no choice. The guys were making all the choices for her. They chose to marry her. She had no choice. They chose to divorce her or get rid of her. She had no choice. The guy she's with now, she may have longed to be married to because that was security. He was quite happy getting what he was getting from her. He wasn't going to marry her. She had no choice. And it's interesting. Jesus responds with care and honor and dignity, and there is no hint of condemnation. So is he afraid to identify sin like sometimes we are with our friends? No, Jesus obviously is not afraid to do that. But he doesn't. He transforms her life by honoring her, and then she goes back to the village and says, come see this man that told me everything I ever did. But he did it in a context of honor. Now, interestingly, skip forward to John 8, the woman caught in adultery, clearly sin. Even there, God takes her side, defends her in a very broken lifestyle. And then at the end of it, when he says, he who is without sin cast the first stone, all the hypocrites decide, okay, better not do that. So they drift off, and he says, is no one here to condemn you? And she says, no, they're alone. And he says, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. So he identifies it as sin, but even in that context, he doesn't condemn. What are we doing with this condemnation thing?
Yeah, that passage always blows me away because when he said that, he must have known he was condemning himself a couple of years later on the cross, right? Like that was he could say that because he had the right to condemn. No one else did. He had the right, and he didn't.
And he chose not to. He didn't exercise it. We don't have the right, but we do. So often I think we need to be much more generous of spirit towards those around us, and then God will take care of the rest. If we're looking for opportunities to love people radically, we will find them ringing our doorbells or saying, hey, can we have a coffee? Or, my husband or my wife is divorcing me. I'm completely stunned. Or my kid just got drunk and smashed the car up and is in cells right now. I don't know what to do. They will come if they know they are loved and they're safe. That's evangelism for me, where we really speak into their lives.
Reminds me of two things. First, it's that Bible verse, the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. Like exactly what you're saying. But it makes me wonder, like in the church, there's talking about churches, just like different churches all across some different denominations. There seems to be a real push against or an adverse reaction to sharing sin in your life because of fear of condemnation. When that should be one of the safest places to do it.
Yeah,
and
should be.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think we're all desperate to be Christ-like. And we function under the premise in the church community where we all want to be Christ-like, and it's a failure to be un-Christ-like, and so we don't want to admit to what God clearly knows, that we're all utter failures at it. That's what grace is. We're failures, and He loves us anyway. If we come to Him and say, yeah, we're a failure. The only thing I have to offer God in the equation, the contract between He and I for salvation, the only thing I bring to the table is my failures and my weaknesses. That's it.
And so what does that practically look like in church? Like how does this problem, kind of off topic here, but I'm really curious about it. Like, how do we fix this? Because it just seems like very strong. Like it's everyone seems to have their things together, and
there's a certain sad arrogance that can creep into our lives when we think we're Christians, and we think we are Christians, but we think we've somehow achieved that our righteousness that is all God-given has anything to do with our merit. And it's subtle, but it's human nature, because we're all about ourselves. That is human nature that still is very much alive and well in us when we're Christians. And so if we think, well, I've basically got the right answers, that allows us to be in the position to say, I've got the right answers, therefore you don't. So there's an arrogance there that is the antithesis of humbly saying, yeah, I'm an utter failure here. And that doesn't mean to say we throw our standards out the window and we agree with everything that's socially going on. No, but we have to genuinely love those that we utterly disagree with, those that are other to us in the church community, those that stagger into church that are drunk and drug addicted and living lifestyles that are bizarre to us and actually are scary to us. And the worst thing for evangelism is our own fear. We want to be safe. And so there's a certain self-centeredness when we want to create our Christian cocoon around us. No, God asks us to be out there where it's dangerous emotionally, dangerous physically, yes, dangerous spiritually, but He says He'll go with us to love those that are the opposite to us. It's a much higher bar. The church, I believe, has to be a club that exists to serve the needs of its non-members. So often the North American church is a club that exists to meet the needs of its members. I don't see that in Scripture. I think we need to be out the door. I study World War I history. I love World War I history, and there's a thing called a CCS in World War I, where you have the frontline trench, and then you've got the secondary trench, and then you've got the third support trenches. And so the guys in the front line are fighting it out. They're being shot, they're being shelled, they're being injured. And on the third line back, there's a thing called a CCS, which is called a casualty clearing station. And that's if you're the walking wounded and you can stagger back there yourself. You stagger back, they assess your wounds, they bind your wounds. If you're good enough to go back into the battle, they'll treat you, they'll send you back into the battle. If you're too badly injured, you need more treatment, they'll send you back reserve trenches into hospitals farther behind the line. I firmly believe the church needs to be a CCS. It is not where the spiritual battles are to be fought. The spiritual battles are to be fought out in the world, in the front lines of our business, our schools, our society, our community, whatever, our neighbors. That's the front lines. And then when we get beat up, when we get injured by that, when we get physically, socially, spiritually, emotionally injured, we stagger back to the CCS, to the church that encourages us, binds our spiritual wounds, our psychological, our emotional wounds, encourages us, teaches us, raises us up. If necessary, pulls us out and says, no, you need to go on a retreat. You need some TLC, and we're going to do that for you, and we're going to bless you with that. But normally, we're the walking wounded. Come back, the church in the CCS model, bandage you up and send you right back into the battle.
Yeah, rather than fighting against each other.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
That'd be kind of weird, right?
That would be very weird in a CCS.
Yeah.
They are very focused in a CCS when the guys come staggering through the doors with blood coming out everywhere. They're not bickering as to the policies. They're not bickering as to bureaucracy. They're focused on serving those that are injured in the battle.
Maybe part of the problem then is using that allegory is that we don't have enough people on the front lines, and so we're bored, and so we have to turn on each other.
We spend a lot of time, money, and energy on the CCS, and not enough on the front lines. Yeah. You could go a long way with that kind of model.
Though. Yeah.
Anyhow, so all of this stuff, I'm very active in my faith while recognizing my limitations. I'm a very poor evangelist, so I love to the point where I want people to ask, and they do. I mean, where I live now, I go to a particular barber, and there's a particular young girl in there. She's a refugee from a Middle Eastern country. I don't think the haircuts are particularly good at all, but I consistently go there. And we're already talking about, because she's interested in why do I keep taking off to Asia? Why am I doing that? And so we talk, and we've talked about Christian things already. And my purpose in going there is not to get a good haircut, although I need a haircut. My purpose is to build a friendship with her that she can understand there's a Lord that loves her, particularly as a refugee from the Middle East.
And I would say, would you also agree then you don't go there to save her, you go there to love her, and that there's a difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. To build relationship that she feels safe, and she starts to express stuff. And she's done it. She asks me, she demands from me information on why I am the way I am. And of course, I have to be very cautious with that. So, now when I go, about every other time when I go for a haircut, I bring my wife, Louise, and I get Louise to go get us coffee. And so she buys her a coffee because I want her to be safe. I don't want a young girl cutting my hair to think, who's the freaky old guy who's getting too friendly? So I do it very much with Louise so that there's safety there. But the purpose of even getting a haircut is ministry. Everything is ministry. Your mechanic, it should be ministry. Your checkout person at Save-On should be ministry. Everybody should be ministry. We need to serve and love people. And I think all kinds of exciting things start to happen where we might not have time to engage, if people are engaged in this, in the politics of church communities, if we're out there working on the front lines. And we're desperate to go to church to feel nourished, to feel blessed, to feel, just pray with me. I'm exhausted. Okay, here we go, Monday morning, back out. Yeah. That's the model that excites me, and we need to see way more of, I think.
Love that. Okay, so back now to Cambodia. I mean, that was a great rabbit trail. I enjoyed that. So, you're where do we leave off? You're going back there. You're setting up clinics. You're raising money while still working for the RCMP.
Yep.
And that's this whole other thing on the side, right? Because you're dealing with things like the Willie Pickton case and stuff like that.
Not yet.
Okay, that's still later on.
So I'm working basically relief and development. We're doing agricultural development because they destroyed the environment in Cambodia. We're doing medical programs. We're doing orphanage programs, massive amount of
Were you already married at this point?
No, I thought I'd never be married.
Okay.
I spent my career dealing with dead people, and I spend my vacations in a war zone called the Killing Fields. Like, who's going to marry this?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But God found me the totally right person who loves what I do and is very resilient. And she's been to Cambodia many times and has spent long periods there. Even when we have 2 Cambodian sons, very difficult adoptions in an environment that is not what they call Hague Convention. So there's no legal agreements. You have to run all the papers yourself in a very difficult environment. So, we did 2 adoptions together of 2 boys there. Anyway, so where we're at in the story is I'm doing relief and development while still very much doing full-time RCMP. It's exhausting doing both. And I do meet Louise, get married. But then I'm assigned Willie Pickton. And that's a file that I will never forget. It was a life-changing file. I grew up in a Christian home. I wasn't familiar with the world of prostitution. I'd done many autopsies, many dead, both men and women and children. But nothing prepared me for going out to his pig farm.
And so maybe just for those listeners that don't know who the Willie Pickton case is,
he was a farmer outside of Vancouver who would pick up prostituted women downtown East Side, and he would take them out to his farm. He would, using the term farm really loosely, more of a scrapyard than a farm, but he would raise pigs out there. And he would sexually assault them, and then the ones he chose, he would kill, dismember. I won't get into too many of the details there, but basically he killed a lot of women. A lot of women were disappearing, and the police were unaware of where they were going and not particularly interested at the time. They were very transient, as prostituted young women are, and so they didn't bother to investigate for the longest time. But eventually that file breaks, and I'm called to go out to the scene, and I ended up being responsible for his freezer contents, all the heads, feet, hands, ribs. There was burgers, everything. Like it's a horror show. Basically worked 4 years on that file. And as I study my victims, it's important that I kind of understand what I'm dealing with. There were 5 heads that were particularly important forensically, from an evidential standpoint. And so once we recovered them from the freezers in the farm, they went into my freezers in the lab. And each morning I'd come in and I'd get the girls out and line them up, and I would refer to them by name. Normally when you have to remove yourself from files and everything's just exhibit numbers. But there was something about this file altogether different. This was about evil on a level I had not encountered before. Not just criminal activity, but evil. And as I studied my victims to learn about them, I still remember the exhibit numbers very well, always will, of all those heads. But they were Andrea, they were Serena, they were names, and they weren't skulls, they were heads. So I'd line them up on my table with these 5 heads staring at me, and I would process them because I was looking at forensic comparisons between these heads. I mean, it's horrendous. But I wanted to deal with them, and again, most people don't know about this about some policing work, but you want to deal with it respectfully and tenderly. These are young women staring at me, and I want to honor them as best I can in death, be very respectful towards them. And Serena in particular was of critical forensic importance, and as I studied her and learned about her, it became blatantly apparent that she knew and loved the Lord. She was a sister of mine. Was she drug addicted? Yes. Was she prostituted? Yes. Was she the kind of young woman downtown Eastside Vancouver I would ignore and not make eye contact with? Yes. And she is a sister of mine. That was a big wake-up call. To have those two worlds collide.
The woman at the wall.
Yeah. And realize, oh my goodness, what do I do with this? I know how I'm too scared to make eye contact with a young woman downtown East Side because they're generally pretty brash and pretty in your face and offensive, and they can swear at you if they don't like you, and it's uncomfortable. You kind of don't want to engage. Well, is that how Christ would react to them? Like where do I land on this? So there's all kinds of challenges for me in that file, but the biggest challenge was just comprehending that a prostituted young woman might just be a daughter of the Lord that he has died for, and she knows it. And what became clear with Serena was that she was living out her best and bravest life that she could while drug addicted and living down there, and was beaten to within an inch of her life numerous times as she tried to protect other girls from pimps. And she was living her faith. And that's a condemnation for me, because who am I? We look down at the prostituted, scabby, disheveled young woman who's a wreck. And we think, oh, look at that wreck. She might be living a more powerful life for the Lord in her broken circumstances than we are in our lovely, suburban churches. Like it's very challenging. And so I'm no different. I'm greatly challenged by her. And it ended up, I had my computer screen beside me, my examination table with the heads I'd line up, and my computer screen, and the wallpaper photograph I chose for my computer screen was a picture I got from her pastor. And it's her coming up out of the water on Spanish Banks beach in Vancouver, being baptized by her pastor. And there she is coming out of the water, and there 2 feet to the side is her head looking at me. And I have to deal with that as a Christian. And I have to deal with, where am I with the issues of this kind of abuse? Where am I in terms of my love for a young woman that is so different from me, that has lived such a punished, enslaved life? Where was my sympathy? Where is my sympathy for such young women? Am I broken for them, or do I just dismiss them? And on it goes, like very, very challenging stuff. And so I learned a lot from Serena and from the others, but particularly Serena. And I remember, I live in a very weird forensic world, but it becomes normal when you work it.
I want to ask about that. I mean, so you've been dealing this, I think the Willie Pickton case was in the early 90s, mid-90s?
No, it was 2001, 2, 3. I think we went to trial in 3, 4,
okay,
something like that.
So you've been dealing with death though for a long time. You've seen a lot of it in Cambodia and stuff like that. You come across this case. Like, was it? How did you process it? Like you say, it was at a degree of evil that like is hard to comprehend. How do you go home? And
it's challenging because again, these are secret files. You can't talk about them. It's very much under investigation. So I remember coming home, and one of the things you have to learn in the kind of work I did was you have to compartmentalize. You have to learn to compartmentalize so it doesn't creep into your life. And there were a couple of times when that was very difficult. Once, after working all day on the evidence from Willie Pickton, you went home and I arrive home and Louise just yells downstairs, can you put the burgers on the barbecue? Wow, that was challenging. Do I want to eat burgers that night? No, I don't. I've been dealing with that stuff all day. Very different. And so you can't talk about it, and you have to bring that before the Lord. And interestingly for me, oh boy, there's so many dimensions to this. The Lord was really using it to break my heart for young women who are prostituted and abused. I didn't know where this was going to lead. He absolutely did. So I worked the file. I learned to cope with the gravity of what's being done to women prostituted. And then while I'm working that file, it's a joint task force between RCMP and Vancouver City Police. So the VPD guys, I didn't often work with them. I knew them, but didn't often work with them. But now I'm working shoulder to shoulder with them for months. And in one of our meetings, one of the VPD people communicate that we've got a different file. It's nothing to do with Pickton, but we've arrested a guy downtown East Side Vancouver. He is torturing prostituted women, videoing his torture sessions, and we have a bunch of little prepubescent Asian kids on his videos. We don't know what country they're from. Would you mind looking at the videos and seeing if you can tell us what country they're from? and I agreed to do that as a favor for them. And you often think in my line of work, you think you've reached the bottom of human behavior, but there's plenty more deep places to go. Nothing prepared me. Years of homicides, torture killings, drug assassinations, domestic violence killings, all that kind of stuff. Nothing prepared me for pedophile videos or torture videos for that matter. And so he had, I think it was 67 victims or something, and there were 7 little prepubescent Asian girls. Watching what was being done to them, even worse than watching, interestingly, listening to what was being done to them and listening to their responses was heartbreaking and traumatizing. And for those of you who may be watching, listening, and I realize some of this is difficult, there is tremendous hope in these stories. That's why I'm telling them. Anyway, I was devastated by those videos. The good stuff was to come later. We had to go through an investigation first. So VPD were asking me for a country. And it's a long story to get into. It's absolutely miraculous, literally miraculous. But in 72 hours, I had the GPS locations of the rape cubicles those kids were being raped in Asia, and I had the names of the children. Those are not good investigation skills. That's when God shows up and says, these are mine. I will do the heavy lifting. Are you prepared to partner with me here? Because nobody has the skills to do this kind of stuff. But God does. And so I remember I went back into VPD 3 days later to a senior officer and said, I know you asked for the country. I pushed a paper across his desk. There's the GPS locations and the names of the kids in Cambodia. And he just looked at me, leaned over on the desk and said, Brian, he said, we just asked for the country. And I said, I know. He says, wow. He says, you ever believe there's a God? And I said, well, actually, I'm functioning on that premise. And he had no idea what to do with that. But that was to set ball in motion where God had broken my heart for prostituted women through Pickton and that horrendous file. Right on the heels of that, he was to break my heart for children who were sold into sex slavery as a product in Asia, primarily in Cambodia at that time. And now it was, okay, do you want to deal with it? Who wants to deal with this stuff?
Yeah, not me.
Who wants to emotionally go there?
That's insane.
And it's another one of those questions. Okay, I don't want to go there. It's traumatizing. It's ugly, ugly, ugly on steroids. And yet Jesus said, these are my kids. What are you going to do about that? And it was very clear that God was saying, I don't ask you to deal with sex slavery industry with the thousands of people involved in that in Asia. I'm asking you, what are you going to do with those 7? Are you going to step up for those 7? And the answer was yes, we'll do it. I don't have skills, but I'm going to have a go. A pattern of my life is in fear and trembling to say yes, even though I'm scared. And so we assembled an investigative team. We went to Cambodia. Those kids actually had already been rescued, but we found the crime scenes. We executed warrants out in the child brothels of Cambodia. It was a whole community, ethnic Vietnamese community, that had sort of withdrawn from society. The police wouldn't go in there, and they were just buying and selling. Because all the judiciary was dead and the police were embryonic and very corrupt at that time, the pedophiles were flying in by the thousands. They were flying in thousands every year to abuse kids as much as they wanted. There was no protections for them. It was mayhem. And I had senior, experienced, very hardened law enforcement officers from Canada, from sexual offense squads, etc., in tears in Cambodia, witnessing child rape on an industrial scale. So welcome to my...
When you're describing this, I genuinely feel rage.
Yeah.
Come up inside of me, like how, you talk about we talked about love earlier, and care and stuff like that. How do you, how did you process that? Did you feel rage? Did you?
Oh yeah, it's I always describe it as graduate studies in anger management, and I don't want to make light of this because it's actually serious, but I'm a trained sniper. Like, I'm a weapons specialist. Like, I want to kill these guys. Yeah, I just want them dead. I mean, it's horrendous to watch what they do to children. And yet to be disciplined and try and grasp, not to change the fact that what's right and wrong is still right and still wrong, but to actually get into my bones there, but for the grace of God, go I too could be one of those men. And
there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. A lot of people will be like, no, never.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people will say, I am sorry, no, can't go there.
Yeah.
You're naive, I think. I also think that that's a denial of what Scripture clearly teaches, that we are fallen. And if we are good and we are moral, that is the grace of God in our lives. Even if we're not people of faith, that's the grace of our families and our environment and how we've been raised and we are privileged. Left to our own devices, I mean, even through COVID in Vancouver, all these wonderful, civilized, nice people were actually physically fighting in Safeway aisles over toilet paper. Like, the veneer of civilization is very thin.
Yeah.
And we can think, we are naive enough to think that we're oh so civilized and we're different. No, we're not. No, we're not. When push comes to shove, we can go down the rabbit trail of completely immoral behavior if the circumstances dictate, but for the grace of God. So yes,
and I would argue we already do.
We
do. Just in areas that are,
Right.
accepted in our society.
So I don't accept, while I fully accept people's sort of sense of offense, sort of being identified as a potential pedophile. Yeah, it's very offensive. It's also biblically correct. We all have the potential for that, and God has saved us from that. Therefore, thanks be to God. Honor him and thank him and worship him for what he has done in your life, that you are not in that circumstance, but don't ever presume that you are above that. We are fallen. That's a very hard pill to swallow, and I think we have to, in humility, come before him and come before the Bible and say, what do you actually teach that I am? I am fallen. I am also precious and to die for, clearly, but I am fallen. And he is quite prepared to pull me and everybody else out of the mire and the muck at the bottom of the barrel, which we are all capable of getting into. Anyway, so...
It's interesting, though. I just not going to share the whole story of why now, but I hated myself for a long time and viewed myself as just a piece of crap and a sinner and useless and no good at all. And the weight of that I couldn't handle, and so through substance abuse and different things but it wasn't until I read Romans 3 in the NLT version, which is just very explicit about who we are and what our heart is and what humanity is, and that our heart is like an open grave, that I finally actually felt some peace because I could identify with that. And I was like, oh, that's who Jesus came for.
Yeah.
Like it's actually, way good news to accept, and because that's when you need the gospel.
God gets our sin and fallenness. I think he has much...
Yeah, he believes it.
He believes it. He has much greater problem with our self-righteousness.
Yeah.
That's a much bigger problem. He's totally equipped to deal with the sin and the death in our lives. So, I mean, the other thing about this that's very clear from Scripture is that Satan is identified as the great accuser. And this is not to diminish sin. Sin is real, so real that Jesus had to die as the solution for that. But so often the accusations don't come from the Lord. The accusations are from Satan, the one who creates sin, the one who misleads us, the one who leads us down that garden path, ironically and hypocritically for him. He's the one that points that bony finger at us and accuses us and tells us, oh, you can't live a Christian life, you can't do this, because of exactly what he's created.
Yeah.
It just drives me nuts. But we're all in that boat. Whereas Jesus is saying, yeah, it's sin, but I'm good for that. I can deal with that. Are you humble enough to accept how fallen you are? Because that I can do great things with.
Yes.
And that's the position that is so atypical in our society. We're in the church environment where we've landed. We're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
No, we're not actually. We're fallen. And it's that humility that gives us the ability to love the neighbor that we can't stand and they can't stand us.
Yeah.
Anyway, so to carry on with the whole Cambodian thing, we end up starting a center in Cambodia for abused children that are rescued.
And who's we?
Was myself and another couple actually in Sacramento, California. He was a pastor and his wife who had no money or resources but lots of dreams. I had a career and could raise money, so that marriage worked out very well. He was able to quit his job and go to Asia, and they started an agency, and we funded the agency, and we started this.
So Ratanak was already established as a charity at this time?
Yeah, Ratanak had been established for years.
Okay. So you were running a charity while working for the RCMP?
Yeah. And so this really, the Baker file, Donald Baker was the name of the guy who had abused these children so horribly, is a real sociopath, potentially psychopath. But anyway, he he was the one that sort of directed Ratanak away from general relief and development into this ugly world of human trafficking and child and adult sex slavery.
Okay, so previous to this, Donald Guy, you were very much focused on just humanitarian work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so after that,
feeding programs, sanitary programs, agricultural development, education, orphanages, all that kind of stuff, because Cambodia needed it all. But with this file and finding those crime scenes, it sort of dawned on me, or God demonstrated to me, I can do this stuff. There's stuff who would have thought investigational skills would have been this useful to Christian ministry? Absolutely it was. So I did a whole bunch of files. We got convictions in Canadian courts on every file we did. We upped the sentencing bar every time in terms of the precedent we were setting for a number of years in prison, etc. So that's been hugely successful. But the whole thing motivates, the whole thing that motivates me is the kids and now the adults. And so we worked child rehabilitation from child sex slavery for quite a few years. But then we very naturally started to slide into a much bigger industry, which is kind of the mid-teens and up, what would be considered the more typical prostitution industry, sex trade industry.
And so how did you, so you have this case, you go to Cambodia and, find these kids with the RCMP, and then what are you doing to help? You're just trying to identify...
I'm actually doing the crime scene investigation, identifying the locations. They video and photograph their scenes and their victims.
So you work with the
normally.
RCMP, basically doing Ratanak work for the RCMP in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, RCMP's paying me for doing Christian ministry at that stage.
Yeah. Nice.
It was a lovely. I mean, who would ever put that together?
Yeah,
it's just great.
Yeah.
From a weapons specialist to boot. It's hilarious, really. These are not normal missionary skills. Being a trained sniper and weapons specialist is not what any Christian agency is looking for. And it turned out it's exactly what God needed, because those forensic weapons skills can be applied to crime scene analysis.
Which is actually interesting, because when you think of the word missionary, or I do anyway, generally I just think of a guy, that went to seminary, and then has to go preach somewhere for 4 years. But that's very narrow.
Yeah. No. Missions takes all forms.
Yeah.
And God's creativity in all of this fascinates me. So I would do the crime scene investigation, then I would gather all that evidence, and then I would bring that back to courts in Canada. And through this process, I ended up realizing...
And so you're trying to find Canadians that have gone to...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and convict them for what they're doing to Cambodian children. Yeah. Noble work, ugly work, but rewarding. Oh yeah, very rewarding to see those kids safe and to see guys locked up. The wonderful thing was, through this process, it became clear that I needed to quit the RCMP. I didn't have time to do both. It was 2 full-time jobs. It was killing me. My doctor was telling me, you're killing yourself doing this. I was down to 4.5 hours sleep a night, just going for it all the time. And so I had to make a decision, and that decision was a difficult one, because I quit the RCMP a year and a half before pension. So it's kind of financial suicide. I'm not naive to that. But when you're, it's not on TV anymore. When you're staring at a face of a 9-year-old little girl, what I call the big brown eye factor, these gorgeous kids in Cambodia with big brown eyes looking at you. And we were running vacation Bible schools out in the brothels. So the kids would be raped at night. They weren't going to school. They were just product. So we would have them a good chunk of the day, and they'd come to a center. We bought a sex hotel from the Vietnamese mafia. And again, not too many members of the RCMP have done a real estate deal with the Vietnamese mafia, but that's what we did. We bought a sex hotel, and we converted it into a clinic, a school, and a church right in the middle of the brothels.
Awesome.
And we were running VBS out of those, Vacation Bible Schools, and the kids would all come during the day, and they're singing their Jesus songs and their Bible stories. They're having a great, they just love it. They just absolutely love it. And it was crazy, because anybody who's run a Vacation Bible School will know it's probably the quickest way to a migraine you can get. It's full on. These kids were all taught to be sex products at night, but thieves during the day. So every pen, every ball, every crayon you put down is gone. They're thieves, every one of them, and they're trained that way. Very challenging VBS.
And they're trained to do that just to live, for food, to trade.
Well, they're told to. They're pimped out in every way. They're working. They're not working for themselves. They
And how
They're
do these kids get to that spot? Are they like bred for that spot? Are they like kidnapped, or is it?
No, a lot of it was dislocated, traumatized families. That it's a long, very hard, difficult story of what trauma does to families, and so sometimes they were sold by parents knowingly to pimps in the industry. Horrendous stuff, absolutely horrendous stuff.
Deal with your trauma, peoples.
Yeah, trauma is a frightening thing. But anyway, so these kids would come to VBS, and it's a very, very challenging thing to get to know these kids. And well, let's just pitch it this way. I'll ask it as a question. So you got a kid stand in front of you who's great kid, fun kid, who is sexually assaulted maybe 10 times a week by different idiots from all over the world. And you're staring into her face, and how
does she have any trust for you?
Well, that's the key. So you ask her, or you tell her, Jesus really loves you. Now somebody's going to sexually assault her in 45 minutes. How do you deal with that? The angst that created in me was huge. Now they did grow to trust us, just by repeated contact and realizing we were good to them. So they did trust us. But they're dealing with physical injuries. They're obviously dealing with massive psychological and spiritual injuries. So how do I go there? How do I love these kids, knowing that if I don't have the evidence, I can't rescue them? So we sing our Jesus song and we do our Bible study about how Jesus loves you, and then they're taken off to be raped. That's a struggle. Like, who is equipped to deal with that? Nobody's equipped to deal with that. And I had to really labor that through. Who is equipped to deal with this? How do we deal with this? Well, there's only one person equipped to deal with that, and that's Christ. And I very quickly discovered that he is actually quite jealous, I think, of that authority. These are his children. He loves them. He died for them. And sort of the sense I got sometimes from him in my heart was, how dare you think this is about you, Brian? How dare you? Mm-hmm. These are my kids. I love these kids. I've died for these kids. Don't presume you have the skills I have. I am God, and I love them. I will deal with them as I see fit. And then you see them become little Christians while still being raped and abused. You figure, how does that work? Where is the love there? And so after some time, there was two of them. I won't name them because they were being recorded, but there's two lovely kids I got to know very, very well. Both of them very popular with the pedophiles. And I was chatting with them one day, and I chose my words carefully and gently. And I just said, so I don't understand this. Where is, because they were both lovely little Christians. I mean, they were exuberant
How old?
Christians. 9 and 11,
okay.
But run about there. And I said, so where is Jesus when men do bad things to you? And they looked at each other and they looked at me. I will never forget this conversation. And they looked at me sort of astounded, like I was the most stupid person in the world. And then said, well, Jesus is in the rape cubicle with us. He holds our hand. What kind of a question is that? And I suddenly
And this isn't
realized,
what you're saying. This is what these
that's what
kids...
the kids are saying to me.
Okay.
And I suddenly realize I am not the teacher. They are the teacher. They have an understanding of Christ's love in their life that I don't get. My faith is superficial. I absolutely do not adhere to prosperity gospel. I can't stand prosperity gospel. I don't see it anywhere in the New Testament.
Prosperity gospel is that if you follow God, you're going to be rich. And
you're going to be rich, famous, and blessed.
Yeah.
The North American word is blessed, which normally means financial and career-wise, family-wise. I don't see that in the New Testament. I see quite the opposite. I see suffering. God calls us to the hard road. But anyway, I don't adhere to prosperity gospel. But they confronted me with the fact that subtly I do. Because I think we're all like this. When the mortgage is paid, when the kids are doing well, when you have your health, when the job is secure, what do we all say to each other? We all say, oh yeah, God's just blessed you so. Isn't it wonderful? God's blessed you. So does that mean if you lose your job and the mortgage isn't being paid, that God's not blessing you and he's rejected you? We need to be very careful of this. What we actually do, I think we're all in North America, subtle prosperity gospel people. Not overtly, but there is this sense in which if things go well, God's blessing, and if it doesn't go well, well, somehow we're not being blessed. And we seek to be blessed, and we seek to see God's blessing in our life through material, physical, relational, financial things. These kids have figured out that the quality of relationship with the Lord that they have has nothing, zero, to do with their circumstances of life. And that harkens back to Serena in the Pickton case, who's downtown East Side, drug addicted, through no choice of her own. She's force-fed this stuff to control her. Drug addicted, abused, prostituted, living her life for the Lord. She has figured out that Jesus loves her irrespective of her circumstances. These two kids in Cambodia know that they are loved by the Lord. They belong to him. They are his, even if they're going to be raped in another 45 minutes. I'm not that faithful. And I suddenly discover these kids are the teachers. They have grasped the essence of their relationship with Christ that is devoid of the trappings of this world. So whether you live or die, you are Christ's. So that a huge stretching experience for me in my faith to realize that God, in his commitment to these children, obviously longs for them to be saved, longs for them to be safe physically as well as saved. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't. I don't understand that. There's plenty of things that go bad in the world that I don't understand. I'll talk with the Lord about that later and when I'm dead. There's plenty of things I don't understand. But what is very clear to me is the contract, the equation of salvation for these children was that God absolutely commits to transform their heart, their mind, and their soul. That may or may not include their physical body. And I need to live the same way. So this is challenging. It's very challenging stuff. It ramps the whole faith business up another couple of notches. Where how do we live? How do we live? God owns, if we are his, if we belong to Jesus, God owns our hearts, our minds, our souls. That may not translate into any physical well-being of any sort. Can we go there?
So this girl from East Side, Serena, there's going to be Christians that are saying, well, if once you become a Christian, you'll just stop.
Yeah,
right. Maybe not that sin. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not as severe or something like that. You'll just stop. These things will just end right away miraculously and stuff like that. I'm sure you've come across variations of that. Speak to that.
Well, yeah. I mean, does God have the power to stop all these things? Absolutely. He chooses not to. I don't understand that. That's
but the people themselves.
God is God. But the people themselves. A young prostituted woman has just as much control in her dishonorable sin as Christians have in their honorable sin. Now let me unpack that, because we do honor some sins. We honor the sin of making mistakes and getting caught by the communist police in the 1970s and going to prison because you made a mistake crossing the border and you didn't hide your Bibles well enough. And that Christian who's now imprisoned has as much control over walking out of that prison as Serena has walking out of prostitution. You are controlled. And I think the understanding of you can just stop, if it's applied to the world of prostitution, underscores a complete misunderstanding of what prostitution is. It is slavery. The young women involved in prostitution, 97% of them are there unwillingly. They are controlled, they are manipulated, they are enslaved. I know this, I've done the investigations, I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. They are completely traumatized, they have a complete inability to get out. And becoming a Christian does not instantly fix all that. We're still human. Any more than anyone that might have that opinion can say, well, now that I've become a Christian, just get out of debt. Just do it. Get out of debt. Well, wait a minute. That's easier said than done. The circumstances of our lives are very real. When you have prepubescent children being sold as product by the Vietnamese mafia to pedophiles, what am I to say to those kids? Just get out of it. No. There's so much of our life we are not in control of. And at times where others deliberately can control us. And we don't have options. Where do we go with the Lord with that? Well, we have to give it back to Him. Say,
So
okay.
it's a little bit of comparison also then, like if someone says you're, let's say, impatient with your kids, something super simple, just stop. You know, like just stop being impatient, like just never do it again.
Yeah.
I guess you could kind of...
If you overeat, just stop. If you drink too much, just stop. If you're too self-righteous, just stop. If you ignore the neighbor you don't like, just stop. Like everything in life, just stop. No, that's the process that Jesus died, that we will gradually, hopefully start to conform to Him and start to get things right. But recognize that there are some things we're simply not in control of, and we have to carefully hand those to God and say, I am out of control in this area. Can you do the heavy lifting for me? And I will live with the consequences of what you choose for me. But this is your battle to fight. I mean, one of the things that...
So how do you not become accepting of sin in your life with that also being true? Because I very much recognize it. But I also have the other side of me, which is still often telling myself, just like be perfect everywhere.
Right. Yeah, and I think there is a naive concept that we're going to achieve that. But that doesn't mean we're not called very clearly to try. I mean, my staff in Ratac are probably bored of hearing me say my mantra, and I firmly believe this and live by it. We are never, ever required in the Bible, I don't believe, to succeed. Never.
What do you mean by succeed?
In anything. In anything, to succeed in what we desire to do, what we set our goals, what is important to us. We are never required to succeed. We are required to do our best. Success, or what we perceive as failure, that is in the realm of God's choosing. Our job is to do our best.
Be faithful.
It takes massive amount of pressure off. If you're going to evangelize, if you're going to build a church, if you're going to start a mission, if you're going to talk to the neighbor you hate, if you're going to deal with an abusive parent, if you're going to, all the stuff that's just impossible for you to deal with, does God require success? Absolutely not. He requires us, which answers your question, to do our best. Not to say, send, it's a freebie, don't worry about it. No, we're to do our best. We're to struggle with it. But whether we fail or succeed, that's in the Lord's hand. Live your life, do your best.
Actually, this brings up a point. I think it's one of the problems in leadership today. There's such a high expectation, especially leadership in churches or organizations, to be perfect. And if you're not, that's not okay. So then you can't be in that position. So the pressure of leadership to never talk about their sin is extremely high because they can't, be. They have to be perfect. Otherwise, they're not.
We are honest and we're fallen. And we live accordingly. We all know that. Now, there's still standards. There's New Testament standards in terms of discipleship and particularly Christian leaders in terms of having discipline and stable families and abuses of wives. I think in particular in terms of an example from Africa. It's fascinating to me how we can be blinded to things. I had a friend many years ago tell me about working a mission in Africa. And culturally, I'm not saying it's right for a second, not for a second, but culturally, it's okay to beat your wife. And so all these church elders, wonderful godly men, will beat their wives. And this missionary comes in and kind of goes, time out. No way. And the response was fascinating. The response was, well, that's fine for you to say that, but how come you as a North American come and you tolerate, you're telling us we can't do that, and we accept that may be wrong, but don't climb up in your high horse, because in your North American congregations, you tolerate half the congregation sleeping around, which is worse. Oh boy, wake up call. Now, I'm not saying either one of those is right. They're both sin, they're both wrong.
Sleep around, like they just accept adultery or...
Yeah, and many people in the congregation aren't living chaste life in terms of the opposite sex, and that's acceptable to the church. Maybe not officially, but tacitly. It's kind of just, we're not even going to go there. I know pastors who said, well, the whole business of sex before marriage with teenagers, we don't even go there anymore. We've lost that battle. They don't even fight that battle anymore. It's just we don't talk about it, we accept it. And so these African elders were kind of going, you need to be really careful about your attitude. Maybe we do have an issue with beating our wives, but you have an issue of another sort. And they're absolutely right. Both of them are absolutely wrong. But again, we have our little cultural biases as to what's acceptable and what's not, what we'll tolerate, even if it's sin, and what isn't. So it is very, very complicated. And all of these things we have to bring before the Lord and say, what is your example for us, Christ? Because then the bar is very high. Because Christ's example is hugely high in terms of how we treat others. Right from the criminal, pedophiles, murderers, taking lives and destroying them, right through to the nice Christians who are in their own way just not caring for people. That whole spectrum, Jesus died for it all, because it's all sin, unless we're overtly loving to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have learned much from the kids and the adults. Now what we're engaged in.
So you quit the RCMP.
Quit the RCMP.
A year and a half before your pension, which I think is important to note out that, often we try to control things and be like, oh, it's smarter if I just wait in a year and a half.
Yeah.
In different situations people are in, stuff like that. But
God's not interested in my smarts.
Yeah.
He's interested in obedience.
Yeah.
And I don't have a wonderful, spiritually deep financial martyr story. He's taken care of us. We're fine. We haven't suffered.
Yeah.
And again, now, would it mean, I remember saying to my mom, actually, because, I had a wife, I had 2 kids, a mortgage to pay. And I remember saying to my mom, like, if this goes sideways, I could end up under a bridge in a cardboard box with my family. Like, this is brutal. Like, I'm walking away from everything. And she was very, very wise, because she understands what is real blessing and what is not blessing. It's absolutely not prosperity gospel. And she said, Brian, what you have to figure out is this a romantic Irish, you're going to save the world thing that you're engaged in? Or is this a calling of the Lord? Because if this is a calling of the Lord, then do it. And if you end up under a bridge with your family, that's where the Lord will bless you. Wow. Not too many moms would say that, actually. But she's absolutely right. Now, we have not suffered, but if we had, it wouldn't mean it wasn't God's will at all. So I walked away from the RCMP, and that was an interesting and difficult process for me, because I wasn't naive to what I was doing. But the Lord has blessed Ratanak International ever since. It has grown. We're now involved in primarily repatriation of those sold into slavery from Cambodia. Cambodia is a vulnerable country still. It has developed hugely.
So what does Ratanak actually do now? Did you stop doing that work, investigation
with the
work?
kids? That's independent work. It's still ongoing, but it's independent. That couple in the U.S. carried on independently. We no longer fund them. They're separate. We decided to focus on the larger industry of older girls, and because there's just so many of them.
And why the switch?
Just there's so many of them that weren't being cared for, and the
older girls in sex slavery in Cambodia.
In Cambodia, yeah. The younger ones were there was enough services being provided by this charity that we had funded and started and helped with them. That was ongoing. The big chasm of torment that was before us was the older girls. That not enough people were dealing with them. So I figured, let's jump in there. So we started dealing with young prostituted girls. Typical model. They grow up in a poor family in Cambodia. It's post-Civil War. The parents are not educated. They can't feed their kids. They certainly can't pay school fees. And so an older daughter, let's say 15, 17, 18-year-old, decides she's going to get on a bus and go down to the big city, the capital, and get a factory job or something and send the money back home. It's noble. They are brave. I honor them and I admire them. They're country girls. They're innocent, but they're brave. And so they decide to go. They step off the bus in the capital city and they are greeted almost immediately under whatever circumstances. There's all kinds of different models. But basically, they find themselves in the presence of pimps, mama-san, organized crime, whatever. They're outclassed. They have no tools to deal with this, and within 48 hours they're prostituted. Like they're gone. And it's a conservative society, so these poor girls, when they've been raped, they've lost their virginity. They can't even tell their mom and dad what's happened to them because their mom and dad might reject them. So they don't feel they can actually be honest, and even when they do get to go home, they can't say what's been done to them. There's huge trauma here. So we started working in that field before realizing it got worse. And that's arrangements would be made for them to get a nanny's job or a factory job or whatever else by brokers, traffickers, and then it'd be shipped overseas. And so they think they're going to get a nanny's job in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia or in Beijing or wherever. China is the big problem. China, because of one-child policy and gender preference, is now 35 million females short. All the nice, tender, good-looking, wealthy, well-adjusted, lovely men have their girlfriends and wives. You're left with the 35 million at the bottom of Chinese society who are the criminal, the deviant, the violent, the whatever. They're the ones that don't have the girls. That's who these girls are shipped into. So they think they're going for a nanny's job. They're provided passports. They get on a plane. They're flown, or sometimes motorcycle illegally through borders, through Vietnam into China.
How do they get passports?
The passports are paid for. They may be legitimate passports from a job placement agency that gets it for them, or they may be forged. There's any number of models here. Same with work visas. May be legit, may not. They arrive, let's say, in the airport in Shanghai or Beijing. The traffickers meet them there. They take their passport. They instantly destroy them. Now you're illegal. You're in China. You're manifestly not Chinese. Therefore, if you run away, you go straight to prison because you're illegal without a visa or without a work permit. So they've got you. Those girls are sold off normally within a matter of days to customers who want.
And they don't know this is going to happen.
No, they don't. They have no concept of what's happening to them. Some of them go thinking they are going to be married to a lovely, rich Chinese man that will love them and send money back to their family. It's naive, but there is a sense of understanding it's a marriage, using the term marriage really loosely because it's sex slavery is what it is, and it's baby factory stuff. It's we want a grandson or a son or daughter, primarily son. And so they're sold to these families. They're used for labor. They're used for sex abuse. Imagine waking up. You don't speak a word of the language. You don't even know what country you're in. You're thousands of miles away from where you grew up, from the village you grew up in, and some guy's raping you every day. And that's what we were encountering. We were receiving information and phone calls from China, information through families where they were able to sneak a phone call out or steal a phone or something and call their parents and say, this is what's happening. The parents, because we were doing prevention work on human trafficking, the parents would tell us, or the police would sometimes tell us. And so we became very concerned about all these young women that were being sold overseas. We wanted to get them back. How do you get them back? How do you get somebody out of China without a visa? They don't have a passport anymore. Like they're stuck. It's a one-way trip. So we went to the Cambodian police, expressed our concern. We have developed good relationships with the Cambodian police over years of doing these kind of investigations from the pedophile days and even before Civil War days, goes way back for me. And the Cambodian police, professionally, they still have a long way to go, but they've really worked hard on the corruption issues. They're getting much better. They're doing their jobs. They're actually protecting their society. It's thrilling to watch the transformation we're seeing. It's slow, but we're seeing it transform. So the police say to us, yeah, we're concerned too. We're getting the same phone calls. I'm thinking, wow, you're concerned. That's, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have been concerned. Now you actually care about it. That's wonderful. So long story short, the Cambodian government asked to embed some of our staff in a negotiating team to go to Beijing. And again, this is another one of these things where you do it in fear and trembling. We're not lawyers, we're not professional negotiators, but we embedded two of our team members who ended up being key in the process. They went to Beijing. They negotiated and established China's first bilateral agreement with any country to get young people out undocumented. Anybody who's even transited through China knows, even between flights, you don't change flights in China without an entrance visa and an exit visa. Like they control it tightly. we're getting young people out without any papers. And that bilateral agreement is in place. It's now in place with 6 other countries as well. Our team have become known as subject matter experts in this, and we help governments negotiate that. And this is a legal process of freedom. It's like what it does is it results in a thing called a laissez-passer, which is a sheet of paper that is your temporary passport home. It's your ticket out of slavery. And so we can't help the girls escape, per se, in China. We have no formal presence in China. There's no NGOs in China. I don't know if anybody's ever thought about it, but think about what an NGO is, a non-government organization. There is no such thing as an NGO, a non-government organization in a communist country. Everything is government. So we don't exist. We don't have standing there. But the girls can be coached or encouraged to escape. They escape, and we have them jumping out of moving cars, swimming through sewers. There was one.
How do you find them? Do you even start to
well,
encourage
we don't. They escape.
Oh.
They find us. Their parents find us, or now, because we've worked so long with Ministry of Social Services.
If there's a girl in a remote village in China, like she doesn't know. She barely knows where she is.
Yep.
How could she get in touch with Ratanak?
Oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes there's no prior communication whatsoever. That would be the norm now, actually. But they just escape the horrendous circumstances. They run away.
And where would they run to, though?
Whereas before, they would run and eventually be passed to the Chinese police, who would send them to prison as illegal. Now there's enough protocols. Sometimes it takes 1, 2, 3, 5 months of detention. But eventually it filters through that the Chinese police realize there's a protocol here. We actually have to take her to the Cambodian embassy. There's 6 Cambodian embassies in China. So they take them to one, or the girl actually runs herself, gets somehow to the embassy. Once they're identified as Cambodian, the Cambodian staff in the embassy ask a series of questions. They identify her as, she's Cambodian. The Chinese police then release her and leave her at the embassy. And now we've got a legal process to do the paperwork to get them home. So it's really exciting. And as a Christian agency, to have participated in building the systems of freedom, William Wilberforce would be proud. And I'm very proud of my team and what they've accomplished in terms of creating a mechanism for freedom out of slavery. And so hundreds return. And a week and a half ago, I was at the Phnom Penh airport for 6 new arrivals of young women coming back from slavery, years of abuse. They leave for 6 months to do a nanny's job, and they come back 10 years later, 10 years of slavery and abuse. And to see, as I did 10 days ago or thereabouts, a girl come out of the airport with Ministry of Social Services staff, immigration police, our staff, and she had a cell phone, so her mom met her. And seeing her and her little, probably 7-year-old brother greet her, that's something that it's the stuff of movies. It is the stuff of movies to actually, as a small Christian agency in Vancouver, not only build the systems to make this possible, but actually see the young lives return and realize they have freedom. They have freedom and meet their families and watch them kind of collapse into each other's arms and realize, wow, this is rich. So we get to live a movie. We really do, in terms of these stories, what they have suffered, their escapes. Every single one could be a Hollywood movie. There's stuff that's bizarre that you just think Hollywood couldn't even write this stuff. And yet here they are. We take them to our center. We have a custom-built design center to prevent suicide, because that's a risk for us. Once they get out and they've got time to think, that's actually the highest risk time, is when they've got time to realize what a mess their lives are, then they can commit suicide. So our building's designed to prevent that. It's a lovely, nurturing environment. We have
so when they get back, this is somewhat obvious, but maybe not, that the suffering sometimes it's just as bad.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and there's rejection from families sometimes too. So we have to work with the whole family. But so anyway, we receive them, we bring them back to our center for medical assessment, police investigation, interviews, all that kind of stuff. And then our team, cognitive therapy, narrative therapy, trauma care. Our team go to work with them on the trauma care, and we also find the families if we don't know where they are, coach the families on, your daughter is not to be rejected. She's a victim. She didn't choose to do this. That has to be taught oftentimes. And then we bring them back and we teach them job skills, and we continue for the next 2 years with psychological care for them while training them in a job skill where they can earn money, that they're not vulnerable to human trafficking again, where they actually have an income and have dignity in the community. So it's a whole package that works for 2 years for each person. So I've got a staff of about 80 now, all Cambodians who work this very successfully. It's very exciting work. It's exhilarating, and it is, I think, very dear to the Lord's heart to see young lives that have been thrown away rescued and rehabilitated and given hope. And we don't have a formal Christian program because we're in partnership with the Cambodian government. It's a quota secular program, but we're not crazy. All the staff who have direct contact with the young women that come into our care are Christians, and we have a staff Bible study. And so often, and this gets back to my premise of evangelism, where we don't preach to these girls. We love them like they're our own daughters, and the staff don't quote minister to them in the classic sense. Don't. It's a secular program. We can't, but love them. I don't worry about evangelism, because if we love them, and we do the way we should, within 48 hours they're saying, "Why are you like this? What is this? What is this thing you do? Oh, that's a thing called compassion. You haven't seen that before." Well, why? Well, because we believe, and I love the expression, "you are to die for." They've never heard that. They're a piece of meat that was sold for $1,000 for slavery. They're a product. No, you are to die for. You are that precious. Well, why am I to die for? Well, not just anybody. God of the universe died for you. And so many of them will start to come to our, quote, staff Bible study, because they want to be like the staff. They want to be like their counselors. They want to hear what gives them value. And so...
I'm going to pause you here a second. When you say we're not preaching to these girls, we're loving them, it makes me think of... it makes me wonder the question, when is it okay to preach to someone? What context is that okay? Because I think that it's quite common that this happens in just parenting, that we preach to our kids everything that's right and wrong, but we don't actually love them.
Yeah.
Or, churches, they preach to their members what's right and wrong, but they don't actually love them. And it seems like it's not just, it happens.
Yeah. There is clearly an overt time and place. There's a time and place for overt ministry and preaching the gospel. Yeah. That's, I don't think, what we're called to. We're called to always be prepared to have an answer. I think a lot of times when we're passive in our Christianity, it's not because we're seeking to love people into the kingdom and we're looking for opportunities to share the gospel. It's because we're too scared to share the gospel. Those are two very different things. So our staff and my heart is to look for opportunities. Love them, love them, love them. When they ask, answer the question. That's your opportunity. Go for it. Don't hold back. When they ask, always be prepared to give a reason for your faith. And then you speak and say, "Do you realize you're that precious before God? Do you realize that's why we love you, even though we've never met you until 48 hours ago at the airport? Do you realize you have this kind of value?" That's even in terms of a trauma counseling standpoint. If we, and this is true for every one of us in Canada, the US, the West as well, if we can grasp that anybody would die for us, there's the basis of self-esteem. It really is. If your life's a mess and you're ready to commit suicide, or at least have just lost hope completely, and you are confronted with the fact that an uncle, or better yet, a stranger, some guy in Montreal you've never heard of, some woman in California thinks you are so valuable that they would die for you. You got to take a second look at who you are. You got to kind of go, really? I'm that valuable? How much more is that true if it's God of the universe who has died for you? And so imagine coming back as an enslaved young woman who's been a product and being confronted with the fact that anybody would die for you. That's revolutionary. Like you want to start counseling? There's the place to start. You are that precious. It's gold. And I've said to Canadian government officials who are very interested in what we do, and the Canadian government have wanted to fund us, and I refuse funding from the Canadian government. And they've been quite shocked at that. And I've said, well, we work for the great physician. I've actually told senior government officials that we work for the great physician. Let me unpack that for you.
You asked.
This is the guy who transforms lives because they are precious and he died for them, and they come to know that. If I receive federal government money from this, I have to downgrade the Christian component and secularize it. That's a non-negotiable. It's central, even though our program on paper is secular. Now, there was enough Christian influence and enough of these young people becoming Christians that many years ago we went back to the Cambodian government in the interest of integrity and actually told them, said, we know it's a secular program, but in the interest of honesty, you put it on the table, you take the risk. Said they're becoming Christians. What do we do with this? Because we're in partnership with you. And they say, oh no, we're so concerned that profoundly vulnerable, traumatized young women are being manipulated by a cult that we don't want that kind of stuff going on. But we've watched you, we know you, we're in partnership with you, you love these girls. If they want to become Christians and become like their counselors, blank check, go for it, we trust you. So by having integrity, we still have, quote, a secular program, but we've got complete integrity to be who we are before them, which is lovely. So again, it's a matter of being honest and swallowing hard and taking the risk with the Cambodian government officials. And Cambodian government officials too there was one I had a conversation with many years ago, very senior person, terrifying person actually to have supper with. And just because they are who they are. Mm-hmm. And if they don't like you, head for the airport. Like it's not a democracy.
Yeah.
So I was asked to have supper with this person, and I assumed there's going to be me and representatives of 50 other charities or whatever at dinner. And I arrive at this hotel, and there's a table set for 2. And I'm like, oh my goodness, no, what is going on? This person's very senior. And their handlers came out and said, they'll be out in a moment. So I sat down, and it was a female, very powerful female. And she came out and she sat down, and in a Cambodian context, you sampe. It's like a praying sort of, you put your hands together in front of your mouth and the higher your hand, the more respect. Yeah. So I sampe, say thank you. It's an honor to have supper with you. I didn't know I was just having supper with you, but why? And she said something very interesting that startled me. She said, yeah, I've been wanting to have a conversation with you. She said, I've been watching you. You're a borate, and a borate is like a foreigner, an outsider, one who does not belong. And she said, you're a borate, and you love my people more than I love my people, and that shames me, so you have to explain that. Wow. What a question to be asked by a person of that stature. And we had a lovely evening where I just said, oh, that's easy to answer. But I love your people because I serve a God that loves your country. My God loves the geography, loves the language, loves the traditional dance, loves your culture, loves every person here. And I said, you know that we're called to work with the downtrodden, the slaves, the people that are nothing. They're low. They're Cambodians. I love them. But I said, I'm not called to them in particular. I'm called to Cambodians. So I'm called to honor and love you as well. So you may be powerful and in government, but you are just as precious to my God. And I am called to honor you as well. And it's very hard to take offense when you're being told by some guy that his God says, you're fantastic. And that's basically what I was saying. And she was kind of like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool, And we have this great relationship where we have conversations. And again, a couple of months ago, I saw that same person, and we had tremendous conversation.
How do you share the gospel in that way, with them recognizing that, that they're deeply loved and they're fantastic in how they view God, but God also sees that they need to repent from their sins and that they're sinners. And there's like that. How do you communicate?
That comes later. I honestly can't say as I've had a senior government. Oh no, I've had one. But generally speaking, I have not had senior government officials come to me wanting to repent. A victory for me in the context we work in is when senior government officials say, I trust you and respect you. Then we're free to do our work. That's a success. Now, I have had one in the past.
No, but I mean, like when you're sharing the gospel, I mean, you're sharing the love of Christ, but you're communicating that it's because that we need Him because we're broken. Like, how do you share that with someone?
I don't initially, and in that conversation, I didn't. So there is a graduated step process to this, where when I have an initial conversation like that was, why do you love my people? I don't start on sin. That'll come later as the relationship grows, where you start, and then we do that with the young women. And the one example I do have of a very senior government official who actually Cambodian Christian church leaders were terrified of. he was with me in very difficult circumstances without identifying who he was. It's a long story, but they can be it's quite challenging at times. But this guy showed up as a driver for us. And he was my driver as I taught people about what we do in Ratac. And I didn't realize it was this senior government official was acting as my driver. And he just listened to everything. So he wanted to hear what we believed without it being catering to an outsider.
Yeah. Wow.
Highly manipulative, actually. But all I did was express my love. And at the end of that, I had another senior government official who was a Christian come to me physically shaking and saying he wants to meet with you in private. He is really upset and wants to know more about Jesus. And we met in a secret location later because it was sensitive. And we talked through it. Then you get to that whole piece of repentance and we're broken and Jesus can restore and transform. But there needs to be that acceptance of, yeah, I give it to you because I'm a mess. And I understand that and I accept that. And I acknowledge that before you. And he did that.
What happens if you're telling people that before there's that acceptance? What happens when Christians start, evangelizing in a way where they're like, you're a sinner, and just going hard on that, when there isn't that, even openness to it yet, to hearing it.
Yeah. Sin and brokenness is best accepted, I believe, in a circumstance of safety. People need to feel safe. And I think so often we do a less than perfect job of making people feel safe and loved so they can hear it. If a complete stranger comes up to you and says, you're a complete idiot, well, the wall goes up. If your mom or your dad, or even your son or your daughter, or a very dear friend or a spouse sits you down and says, look, I got to tell you, on these circumstances, I'm trying not to be insulting here, but you're an idiot. Then it's like, okay, there's a context here to absorb that and say, I think I might need to change. I don't think it's any different relationally. I think if we create the environment of safety, people can, not always, but that's obviously how the Lord works. But I think they can accept that and move forward with that. Where if we do it in a vacuum where you're a sinner and you're out there and the first thing you say to them is condemnation, well, it's ridiculous. It's not normal human interaction.
I think it's more common than we realize. Two more questions. First, people listening to this are, I'm very moved by it. It's real. It's heavy. It's hope giving. But what do you need? What does the organization need? How can people support? How can people help?
One of my greatest frustrations is I would love people to see what we do. What I was doing less than 2 weeks ago out at the airport, seeing a slave set free. It's like something from hundreds of years ago in slavery. It's still happening, and we actually can participate in freeing real live slaves who have escaped. Like, it's amazing. But I can't. That's one of my biggest frustrations. It's so sensitive. There are so many security issues, so many privacy issues, so many criminal, even investigation issues at times with police. We can't do that. So my biggest frustration is that we have this tremendous ministry that's having a huge impact on Cambodia, the nation, in terms of systems and legality, but also on hundreds of individual lives. And I kind of have to hold it at arm's length for people. I can't bring them all over and do the typical church trip, come and see, the kids in the school. You can't help teach English in this school. They are traumatized. So really what it boils down to is I actually do call supporters to a kind of a higher level of maturity. It's not about meeting our emotional needs and going visiting. We do that rarely, on occasion, under some circumstances when it's safe to do so. It really is about challenging people to pray for us and support us financially and support a Cambodian team. This is a Cambodian team that themselves, their family histories, there's massive amounts of trauma there too. And so we minister to our team who minister to others. We're empowering Cambodians to rebuild their own country and rebuild their own systems as young Cambodian Christians. Most of the ones who do their work are in their probably late 20s, early 30s. They're terrified half times by what they do and very skilled at what they do. And so to support them. So certainly in terms of our organization, it sounds a little crass, but it's true. It's prayer and money. I can't generally use people from here. There are occasions when trauma specialist therapists have gone over, not to train the young women in terms of the therapy or do the therapy with the young women because that's too sensitive. You have to be doing it in the Khmer language. But they can go and actually train our staff sometimes. So there's occasionally people can interact that way and actually train our staff and upgrade some levels of skills. But generally speaking, visiting is not something we can do. So it really is about prayer. So in terms of our website, Ratanak.org, Ratanak.org, to visit us, sign on for funding. We would love monthly funding. Stable funding is everything because we commit to these young lives for 2 years. And my worst fear is committing to a young woman for 2 years and then getting halfway through her therapy program and reintegration back into a free life and running out of money. We've never run out of money. We've come close. We've never run out of money. But that's long-term funding where we know, okay, that's my budget. I know it's coming in is gold for these lives. And we unfortunately can't do sponsorship either for the same privacy security reasons. But we update people as best we can on individual stories of some of the lives that are coming out. So you can follow us on Ratanak International on Facebook as well. There's Instagram. Just go on our website and there's all kinds of those links to plug in.
Yeah. Okay. Last question is, I'll give a story first. There's a mission organization in Scotland called 20 Schemes. And it's a guy that grew up in the schemes of Scotland, which is like the housing projects, super poor, and got saved in prison. Mez McConnell's his name. Great story. But he got interviewed a couple of years ago, and he got asked about like the suffering that's happening in those housing projects and stuff like that. And he said that same kind of suffering is happening in the American church, like the first world American church, but it's just veneered with nice houses, nice cars, all that stuff like that. But that real suffering is happening. So with that in mind, can you share the gospel or share some hope with the listeners that are, everyone to some degree is dealing with suffering, and listening along, and just a closing thought.
Sure. Sometimes suffering is not of our doing. Sometimes it's almost worse when we know we've done it to ourselves, and that's really corrosive to us when we realize I've just been a fool in terms of decisions I've made. Under either circumstance, I think the examples of the children we worked with in Cambodia, the young adults we still work with, serve as a great example of hope for us, particularly those who have been abused. And there's many in North America, many in Canada, horribly abused by families and others. That if God can redeem a life that's been raised for abuse, raised in poverty and destruction, has been sold for $500, if she's pretty, $1,000. We also work with males, haven't even talked about that today. It's even worse than the females, what they go through in terms of slavery. But if the young people who have been sold as product to be absolutely destroyed in every way, mind, body, and soul, can be recovered by the love of Christ, can live lives not just where the lives are cobbled together and they're sort of half functional, but they actually know joy and laughter and hope and meaning. We see this all the time in Cambodia. So for any listeners who are watching or listening to this, if there is abuse that is overwhelming, if there's a sense of worthlessness, if there's a sense of, my goodness, I might as well be a product the way I'm being treated, Jesus is one who restores. And I have sat with so many young women who have backgrounds that I hope nobody listening has experienced in terms of actual slavery, sex slavery and abuse, with sometimes thousands of rapes that they've experienced. And I have seen them thrive, live with genuine joy and hope and laughter. That is what Christ does. That is his thing. That is what he thrills to do. He's not interested in our skills. He's not interested in our talents. He's interested in the failure. and the brokenness and the tragedy of our lives. And it is precisely that. He says, that is the gold, the crucible that I will create a new life from. And that is the joy I will give you, knowing that you were broken. Not some kind of a peculiar spiritual, psychological denial of all that's happened, a complete acceptance of that, but saying, that is what I value because that is what I died for. And that is transformative. So for everybody listening who is suffering horribly in whatever circumstances, Jesus is good for it. And those two kids, when I was talking to them in Cambodia, where is Jesus when men do bad things to you? And the answer was, he's in the rape cubicle with us. And it was an insane question for them because it was so self-evident. So whatever room you're in, the room of financial destruction, the room of divorce, the room of addiction, the room, whatever rooms we live in that torment us, where is Jesus? He's in that room with you. He holds your hand through that. And that is the gift that is Christ's and Christ's alone. There's no other relationship and there's no other religion in the world comes close to him being in the room you're in your brokenness. And therein lies the joy and the hope. Grab a hold of it and run with it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Before we let you go here, I just want to ask for your help. This podcast is something I love doing, and I know it's making a real big impact in people's lives, and these conversations are important to have and to share. And there's a lot more I want to have. There's there's a pastor in down south that I know that got addicted to drugs after back surgery and painkillers. There's a Christian rapper in LA I want to go visit and hear his story. There's more conversations I want to have like that. But the equipment cost a lot of money. There's a lot of time involved. There's subscription fees to host the content, editing costs, and so I don't make any money on this podcast at all. It actually costs me quite a bit. I think I just paid my editor last month $900 just on that side alone. But I really believe in it, and I think it's important. So if you are blessed by this content and want to see more of it, would you be willing to support financially? That would just go a super long way. You can do that on my Patreon, patreon.com/furiously curious. $5 a month. It's not a lot. A cup of coffee. There's other amounts there as well. If you would want to give more than that and supporting the show, would be hugely appreciated. You can email me at kyle@furiouslycurious.co. And I think with that and the more support I get, hopefully I know the content will get better as well, and I'll have the ability to do more interviews, to improve on the production of the show as well. So that would really mean a lot and go a long way. But again, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Please like, comment, share with friends and family. And if you have any feedback, love feedback. So you can hit me up on my social media or at on my email, kyle@furiouslycurious.co, on my website. With that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.